Hello, and welcome to Cornell in Your Community, a workshop on container gardening. I'm Jim Irish. I'm a member of the class of 1974 and co-president of the Cornell Alumni Association of Westchester. It's my privilege to welcome all of you gardeners and aspiring gardeners to tonight's event, presented by experts from Cornell Cooperative Extension in Westchester. The Northeast Corridor Office of Alumni Affairs and Development at Cornell is co-hosting this event with our local Alumni Association, and we are so pleased that so many of you have joined us not only from other parts of New York State, but also from other states in the Northeast as well, to learn how to create and care for container gardens. Before we start, I'd like to mention two items. First, this presentation is being recorded and a link to the recording will be emailed to all attendees. Second, if you have questions for our speakers, please enter them in the Q&A box. Use the chat feature to connect with other attendees. When using the chat feature, remember to change your settings from all panelists to everyone and panelists so other attendees can see your comments. It's now my pleasure to introduce Barbara Sachs. Barbara has been the executive director of Cornell Cooperative Extension in Westchester County for the last 15 years. She has a BA in criminal justice from John Jay College, as well as a master's degree from the City University of New York, and a second master's degree in public administration from NYU. Among her many accomplishments, Barbara has published articles about innovations in city management. Tonight, Barbara will share with us how Cornell Cooperative Extension supports local communities throughout New York State through its offices in every county, and how we can benefit and support the work that the extension does. She will then introduce our two gardening experts. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, Jim. We at Cooperative Extension are very pleased to be doing this program tonight for Cornell alumni, and we've tailored it specially to your needs. Container gardening is always a great topic, and it's received even more attention lately during the pandemic. Even the Wall Street Journal had an article I read this past weekend about container gardening. But first, a little about us at Cooperative Extension. We are part of the university's way of bringing the research-based education to the community to solve practical problems. Every county in New York State is served by a cooperative extension program, and we coordinate our efforts statewide. In Westchester, we have three main program areas: nutrition, 4-H youth development, and horticulture. Our horticulture programs serve both the residential as well as the commercial communities. We provide the latest and best advice on horticulture and pest management. Hillary Jufer, who you'll hear from in a little while, heads up that program, where we respond to about 3,000 residents and business inquiries a year. We have our own laboratory on the premises here, where we analyze plant and pest specimens. We also have no-touch drop-offs, where you can drop off samples 24/7 in case we need to discover what it is that your specimen actually is. To find us, all you have to do is go in your web browser and type in the words Cornell Cooperative Westchester. That will bring you to our website, and you just click on the contact button at the top right side of our webpage. That brings you to an easy-to-use form. You fill it out with your contact information and describe your question or your problem, and that's available to you 24/7 also. If you are in another state or county, however, go to your web browser and type in the name of your county and state and the words cooperative extension. And the reason you want to put in both your state as well as your county is because if you only put in your county, you may end up in a cooperative extension in another state, which has a county by the same name as the one you're in. So tonight, Hillary Jufer, with the assistance of Amy Albam, will be our presenters. And I know that you can hardly contain your enthusiasm. So I'll turn this over to the experts now, starting with Hillary, who will fertilize our minds with horticulture knowledge. Thank you so much for signing up for this tonight, and I hope you enjoy the program. Hillary, I'm going to turn off my mic and video and take it away.
Thank you so much, Barbara. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I myself and Amy are very excited to talk to you all today. So we're going to give a brief presentation about container gardening. So I am going to focus on annuals and ornamentals. Where can they be grown? What are the containers made out of? Both the container and, what are the plants inside? I'm also going to talk about different potting mixes and maintenance. And from that point, I will turn over the presentation to my colleague, Amy Albam, where she will cover a lot about vegetable crops and more things that are fruiting. She's going to talk about how to assess a site, what should you grow, planting and transplanting, care and harvest, and how to prevent pests. I will say that this is going to be a very broad presentation. So as Barbara just said, if you have any questions, you should definitely reach out to either us in the Q&A or to your local extension. And now we won't be talking much about houseplants, but I'll make sure to sneak a little in for everybody who might be interested. So where can I even have a container? It's something that I want. What can I do? You can have it at your front door of your house or your apartment. This is actually an apartment to welcome your guests as they come inside. Say you're in a big city, Manhattan, something along those lines. You don't have property outside, that's fine. You can use a balcony. These containers don't even have to be on the ground. As you can see, you have some hanging basket containers. You can also have containers maybe in your community garden as in a raised bed. This one's actually in Westchester at Hartbrook. You can have them inside, right? Because it's something everyone has houseplants and likes to see what you can grow. You can totally do them inside. Or in your backyard, front yard, next to a driveway, on a patio like this. You can have them be next to established plants in the ground. You can just have a bunch clustered together. The possibilities are endless. So many decisions. So what do you have to think about? You want something that's a pot that's large enough to fit a fully grown plant. So you want to think ahead to what size it has to be. You want to have adequate drainage. So you want to see your pot. Does it have drain holes? Does it have enough drain holes for what I want? Is it a plastic pot and you have to punch out the little drain holes? Is it a fiberglass pot and you might have to drill the drain holes in? These are all questions that are really important to ask yourself when you start looking. If there's no drain holes in it, you might want to put something in that's semi-aquatic that likes having a lot of water. And you do have to watch out because without drain holes, you might have problems with root rot from just water pooling. And location. If you're on a balcony with a door that's 24 inches across or 32 inches across, you're not going to fit a 40-inch planter outside of the door. So you have to think about that. If you're putting something at the end of your driveway and it's something that's made of stone, but you have to bring it in the winter, I don't want to carry something all the way up my driveway. So just think about where you're putting it and what you're putting in order to figure out what you want to do. So here is a few different types of container materials, and this is by no means all of the container gardens that you can have. There's metal, there's stone, there's cement, terracotta, wood, plastic, fiberglass, grow bags. There's even some pots that are made of rice hulls and they're completely biodegradable. They last about 5 years inside. 5 years outside and up to 10 years inside. So there's a whole bunch of options. I'm going to just talk about a few of the most common ones real fast. So terracotta. Terracotta is very heavy. It is heavy and porous, and you want to make sure that you are watering frequently. You can see in the picture on the bottom how that pot on the bottom of it looks like it might be a little wet, and that is the case. Since it's so porous, you'll see water coming through it. So you want to definitely water a lot when you're in terracotta pots. And you can see the picture on top, there is a crack. You want to store it in a frost-free area for the winter because they too tend to crack because of the freezing and thawing. Wood. So if your planters are not made of cedar or redwood, you must seal the inside of the planter. You can do that by charring the planter, by painting, or as you can see in the picture above, there's actually a plastic liner inside. You can do that too. And it helps prevent rotting and leaching of any material from inside the wood into the soil. And always check your label of the wood. A lot of pressure treated woods are not recommended for vegetable gardens. And so if it is for a vegetable garden, you might want to either go with something that's not treated or a different material. And plastic is really easy. It's lightweight. It can be left outside over the winter. You don't have to worry about freezing and thawing. It's not biodegradable. And there's even self-watering options. There's a whole bunch of different colors, shapes, sizes. You can do whatever you want with them. Always choose the proper container. You can see the evergreen chemacypris on my right. So you can see it's starting to brown out and it has ivy on the bottom. So you have the chemacypris and the ivy taking up and needing that root space on the inside. So you see when they don't have enough and they didn't plant it in a proper size, the plant's starting to suffer. In the middle, you can even see that the pot broke. It couldn't sustain it. The pot broke and the tree looks pretty bad. And the other picture, it's hard to see, but on top you can see it's starting to actually defoliate. And there is a crack along the side of the planter. So always make sure that you're using the right planter for the right size material. So for potting mix, you want something that's lightweight and porous, and it drains well, but stays moist. A lot of all-purpose commercial potting mixes do this by using peat moss, vermiculite, and perlite. So the perlite you can see in your soil, it's like little white circles. The vermiculite is thin and they can be brown. All three of these are used to aerate soil, improve soil structure, and hold moisture. And they all have a relatively neutral pH, so you don't have many problems with it changing any of the soil. And the peat moss will actually break down into more organic matter within the soil. Don't use just garden soil. Don't use just topsoil. Don't go into your backyard and say, oh, I have this area over here that has some soil. Don't use it alone. There's not going to be, it's too dense. And if you are looking to make a soil yourself, I'm not going to run through it all, but here's a mix for herbs, vegetables, and a mix for ornamentals. So you're going to look at this and say, but Hillary, you just told me I can't use garden soil. In this case, under ornamentals, it's okay because it's not the only thing that you're putting in. It is in a mix, mixed with sand and vermiculite and perlite and compost. And you can tailor it specifically to the type of plants that you're buying. Okay, and so you're going to fertilize your plants, and you're actually going to fertilize them often as directed by the label. You're going to have a lot of water movement through the soil, so you're going to need to fertilize since it's being leached through the soil into the water. There's synthetic fertilizers, which are man-made, so they're inorganic fertilizers, and there's also organic fertilizers, which means that they're made naturally and they contain carbon. So there's a whole bunch you can choose from: time release, water soluble, slow release, liquid. The possibilities are endless. You can go to a garden center or somewhere along the lines and find one that you like. Let's plant. So in this, I planted an aloe. So the first thing I did is I looked at the bottom of my planter. Do I see a drainage hole? Yes. Is it adequate for my aloe? Absolutely. So you will check that first, and also take your soil that you're using and pre-moisten it, the amount that you think you'll need for the planter, and probably a little bit more because it might settle. Then you're going to add about 1/3 to 1/4 of the planter with soil, just so you can get the ball rolling. And then you'll put, in this case, my aloe, but you'll put something inside the planter to see if it fits right, to see if it is going to give you the exact placement you want, if it's too low or too high, just to double check before you do anything. After that, you're going to open up the pot once you know it's exactly where it wants to be. You're just going to tease the roots a little bit. You'll find that sometimes the roots can be bound in the pot and they'll circle the bottom. So you want to just tease them a little bit so that they are open and take up more of the room in the pot to get more nutrients and water. From there, you're going to start filling, and this is all the pre-moistened soil. So you're going to fill till it's about an inch above, an inch below the top of the pot, so you can hold on to that water as you're watering. At this point, you can add a stone or a mulch in order to keep the water in the soil and to prevent weeds from coming through. Just know that if your mulch is black, a dark brown, or a red, it was most likely dyed. So if it is a dyed mulch, make sure you're putting it somewhere that if water goes through, it's not going to be a problem in stain. Or you can stick with a natural. And from here, you're going to water. And you're going to water it and so that it's saturated. So what can you plant? We've talked about how to do it. Where are you going to do it? So there's a plant hardiness zone map put out by the USDA. In the chat, there's going to be a really fun link that is a map that is interactive. You can type in your zip code and you can look around and see what you have. So this tells you the average annual minimum winter temperature for your area. So if you're in Westchester, which I am, you're going to be like a 6B up county and a 7A in the center. You're going to be a 7B around Yonkers and below. If you're in New York City, you're going to be a 7B. If you're in like Danbury, Connecticut, 6B. If you're in the DC area, you're 7A and 7B. Boston is mostly 6B with a little 7A around the airport. If you're in Orlando, you're going to be 9B. Miami's 11A and Napa is 9B. So you're seeing these different winter temperatures represented on the map through the colors and the bands. What are microclimates? So you might have a microclimate, which is a local set of atmospheric conditions that are different than the surrounding area. It can be a few square feet. It can be the size of city lot. Where are they found? Urban cities tend to be warmer than rural areas. According to the EPA, annual mean air temperatures in the city with 1 million people or more can be 1.8 to 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than its surroundings. And in the evening, it can be as high as 22 degrees different. What can cause them? Things like trees, you know, under the tree, you have a lot of shade, different ground coverings, or if it's asphalt, air temperature, wind, topography, there's many different things that can cause it. And what am I going to do about it? You're going to identify your microclimates and you're going to map them. And when you map them, you can enjoy earlier blooms by placing plants next to a paved structure or something that's going to retain a little bit more heat. You're going to be able to do that. So what are we going to put in it? So these are some pictures of some ornamentals and annuals. But what you're going to do is you're going to do a thriller, a spiller, and a filler. The thriller is going to be what's like catches your eye in the planter. So the top picture is a celosia in the middle. The pink flower is a sedum, and in the picture, mostly in the center, is a Dracaena spike as your thriller. Your spillers is going to be what cascades out. So the purple and the green flowers that are cascading out, those are different sweet potato vines. You have some ornamental peppers on top. And then the filler is everything that's in between. You have ornamental kale on the top picture. And this one's one of my favorites. In the middle picture, there's a purple plant. It's called Persian Shield. It's a lot of fun. You can reach out for more plants that are great for your area. You're going to want to have these plants in odd numbers. It just looks more natural. And you're going to want to have the same cultural needs. If you have a plant that's full sun next to a plant that's full shade in the full sun, well, one of them's not going to do well. So you got to make sure you know your site and figure out what you need. So maintenance, you're definitely going to need to prune and deadhead. In these pictures, you can see some flowers that don't look so great. There's yarrow in the black pots that need to be deadheaded, and you have a petunia part of a plant mix down in the center, and you can cut those off and it'll promote more blooming. And you can prune to keep the shape that you want in your planter, so you don't have a problem with that. Don't forget the soil. Every year you're gonna want to, you can leave the soil in for a couple of seasons, but you're gonna want to add more organic matter in the top of the planter and mix it in a little bit just so that you kind of refresh your soil. You're going to want to water regularly. Now, this is going to be different if you're somewhere hot in the country, or if you're in New York, or if you're in Florida, or if you're in, it's going to be different, but you're always going to want to water until it's saturated. So you're going to want to water until you see water coming out the bottom and you've done a good job. And then you're going to wait until it feels dry to the touch to re-water, which will change depending on where you are. So you're going to want to water regularly and fertilize. And you can do this with Christmas too. You can have color for seasons. You can put red twig dogwood in. If you have extra pieces from a Christmas tree that you cut off the bottom so it fits in, stick them right in a planter. It'll be nice color for the fall, for the winter. Okay, and this we're not actually going to talk about completely, but we'll just kind of run through it. This is some problems that are common in container gardens. So with regards to interior plants, if you find that your interior plants are leggy and spindly, it might be because there's not enough light in the area that you put it. So you're going to want to relocate the plants to a different area, or it might be that there's too much nitrogen depending on where the plant is outside too. It could be not enough light or too much nitrogen. And you can either relocate or you can apply less fertilizer. And so overwintering, there's a lot that you can do in your pots. So regular watering through the fall is needed, even if you have something in your pots that no longer is flowering. And if it is an evergreen, you will probably have to water until the frost. Stop fertilizing in the midsummer because any of that new growth that happens in the midsummer and later is not going to have time to harden off, and it could very well kill that section of new growth. So you're going to want to stop around midwinter. You're going to move inside. You can either move these plants in to be a house plant if it's like a tropical or something like that. And when you do that, you're just going to want to swap it. So if it's 65 degrees outside, you want your house to be 65 degrees inside, and it'll do a good job acclimating. And you want to, if it's an indoor plant, you're going to want to make sure that it is close to a window for sun and away from any kind of heating elements that can cause it to burn. Or if it's something that might necessarily work in a garage, you cut it back and put it in a garage and leave it there. Or you can leave it outside and heel in, which means cover temporarily with mulch. So like all these pots, you can cover them all temporarily and store the pots that are more susceptible to frost damage in the middle and the pots that are less susceptible to the outside. Great. And so at this point, I would love to introduce my colleague, Amy Albam, who is going to spend a little bit of time talking about vegetables and fruiting crops.
Thank you, Hillary. That was wonderful. I'm going to be talking about vegetables in containers. And mirroring a little bit what Hillary said, but mostly supplementing what she went over already. So I will be talking about assessing the site for vegetables, what you would grow, planting and transplanting, care and harvest, preventing pests, and a little bit of a wrap up. Next, please. Next, okay, thank you. When you are thinking about growing vegetables, it's always a good idea to consider diversity. When you grow various plants together, you have fewer pest problems because there's more, there's less of a target, I guess, for the pest to find. And in this case here, you can grow herbs that do double duty. In the center is an anise hyssop that's flowering, the purple flowers. That's a nice herb, and it also attracts beneficial insects that pollinate the crops and can also feed on pest insects that might be also there and keep pest problems down. Next, please. Okay, when you're looking for a site, you want to consider accessibility, easy to access to the garden, easy to reach everything. And you want to, with people who may be mobility needed mobility accessible or visual or sensory, there are things you can do to make it easier for them to be in the garden. You can use a water source. You want to have that close to any garden, and particularly for vegetables because you're going to be needing to water them a lot. A sitting area and access to shade is helpful as well. Next. So where would you put these? You can assess the site. Hillary went over that very well. You can move containers around, which is a great thing. You want to put fruiting vegetables in full sun because they do mostly well that way. Most vegetables do well in full sun, but you can get away with partial shade for leafy vegetables and root crops. The general rules for containers apply. Smaller containers are going to require more maintenance and higher maintenance. And they'll need more watering, they'll need more fertilizer applications. As you water, the nutrients are leached out, so you do need to apply fertilizer regularly, and you would want to just follow the label directions for how that's done. We would suggest that you use a soil mix and not garden soil. Compost-based mixes work very well. And some vegetables don't really grow very well in containers. Really large squash, full-size squash, melon, corn are better grown in the ground. They might make some kind of ornamental plant, but they won't produce well in general. Next, please. So for large vegetables, large containers are good. In this picture here, I have a fig tree in a large 40-gallon container and some other vegetables in smaller containers. And the large containers might even require watering 3 times a day. So I put a spotlight on the fig container and the watering aids that I use. Those are soda cans, soda bottles, I mean, that are probably 2 or 3 liter. I have them on some aids on the bottom there, but you can also just punch some holes in the cap and fill it with water. And the idea for this is that you let it drift easily and slowly in through the container so that it waters it for a longer time and there's less time in between waterings. And you can see on the pavement in the back there that the water has come through at the end of the time there, and the container is completely watered. Drip irrigation is something you can do as well. In a case like this, where you have a patio, you might have some lines around, and so that could be a tripping hazard. So the watering aids that I use, I found very helpful. You can also use drought-resistant companion plants so that they don't need as much water. In the front there, I have a little portulaca, which is drought-resistant, some tetragonia, and those are all plants that don't require as much water. I also grow eggplants in containers, and they're relatively drought-resistant as well. Next, please. Okay, so What to grow and what to plant. When you're planting, there's two different categories that we use in cool season areas for planting. Cool season crops and warm season crops. And I have a bit of a list here. The cool season crops would be your winter vegetables in a warm climate. And the warm season crops would be more main season or possibly spring and fall if it gets really hot. And so when you plant cool vegetables, they like to have soil that's at or above 50 degrees Fahrenheit at 2 inches. Warm season crops should be at least 70 degrees at that same 2 inches. Some crops like eggplant, you can even go higher than that. And that will get them off to a good start. Plants that are put in too early often will just sit there. And if you plant a week later when the temperature is right, the newer plants could grow faster and overtake the ones that were planted earlier, in a week or so, even at the right temperature. Next, please. Okay, so you want to make sure it'll fit in the container. These are nice large grow bags. And here we have squash and cucumber in these. And this squash will probably fill the whole bag with its roots relatively quickly. I would thin out all of those little squash, the 2 little squash in there that I can see, and just allow the big vigorous one to grow. In the cucumber container, you could probably just put a stake in that, and they don't take up quite as much space. I would put 1 full-size tomato, 2 eggplants, or maybe 3 peppers if they're not real big in a container this size. Next, please. There are vegetable varieties bred for containers. Here is a list of them. And this list will be available again with the slides. And there's a lot of different types you can use. Vegetables like radishes are good anyway. The spring radishes are fine to use anyway. You don't have to have special ones. They do real well in containers, and other small vegetables will do well too. The tomatoes, I find that you really need to have a lot of leaf surface to produce the sugars to really get a very flavorful fruit. So some of these may be a little shorter on flavor, but these are good if you have maybe just a small amount of space and you really want a tomato. Children really like the small vegetables as well. Excuse me. Next slide, please. I'm going to go into transplanting and planting a bit in detail because this is an important part of growing in containers and also growing in the ground. You always want to find nice, sturdy plants, transplants. And on the bottom there, you can see from a nursery, there's some nice sturdy tomatoes and some other sturdy plants that are ready to go out. In the north, a lot of nurseries will put their plants out early. So it might not be warm enough to put your tomatoes out yet, but they're selling them anyway. So if you do buy them, make sure that you can bring them inside or protect them somehow from the cold if it does get cold. So you want to avoid root-bound seedlings for the most part and flowering vegetables that already have flowers. If you find that there's a vegetable that you just really want to have and it's flowering, you can always remove them, but it's better to get a nice stocky young plant better. You want to screen the drainage holes, fill the pot, set in the transplants, water and mulch as Hillary described. I'm going to mention the tomatoes on the top there in the back. Those tomatoes have been in the container a bit too long and their roots are bound. And they're not something that you would necessarily want to buy if you were going to just go out and pay money for them. But if you start them yourself and you did it a little bit too early, you might want to keep them, especially if they're heirloom varieties. So what you would do in this case is you would fill the container partway and you would take that little container out of its little spot and tease apart the roots like Hillary mentioned. And then you would strip off the leaves that would be under the soil when you fill soil around the plant later. So you'd tease the roots a little bit, set it in, and fill the soil up to the point of maybe the top few leaves. And that tomato will grow roots all out the stem, and it will root in better. And so that's one way to do that. Also, if you're going to be growing potatoes, you would put the potato set toward the bottom of the pot. So maybe you'd fill the pot up a third or halfway. You'd put your potato set in, and then you would fill in with the soil mix as the plant grows. And all the potatoes that you'll be harvesting will be forming above where you planted the seed. Okay, next, please. Okay, so to care and harvest, water and fertilizer, similar to what Hillary said. Some vegetables like more fertilizer than others. So usually the fertilizer packet will tell you how to water vegetables. Again, you want to make sure that they are not drying out and that they're not fully saturated either. I have found that even in the big containers, it may take 2 or 3 times a day if I'm home to water. You want to monitor and manage pests. You want to plan for vacation for a continuity of maintenance. You want to harvest at peak. Some of the plants may slow down if the fruit matures. And when frost threatens, if you're in an area that gets that cold, you'll want to bring everything in, whether it's really ready or not. Some vegetables like tomatoes and peppers will continue to ripen as long as they're a shiny green. Next, please. Okay, you can extend the season. Containers warm faster in the ground in spring, so you can get a jump on the season with early crops. They also cool faster in the ground in fall, so you want to choose hardy varieties. You want to cover and mulch and or move the container into a protected place. Sometimes you can winter over relatively hardy plants in a nice protected spot. We did get a question about bulbs in containers as well. And for garlic, that's a bulb. Shallots are a bulb. You could probably grow those in containers. I don't have a lot of experience with them, but they're very hardy. As long as it doesn't stay too wet over the winter, they'll probably be fine. Next slide, please. One thing that comes to vegetables are pests. The vegetables are nutritious and the pests like that as well as we do. So we want to think about least toxic pest management, which chooses pesticides as the last resort. You can observe your plants, and that way you'll catch problems early. It's always nice to be out in the garden, looking around. It's a good excuse to get out there. So if you can prevent a problem, then you won't have to deal with it later. You want to reduce plant stress as much as you can with cultural management, and use cultural and mechanical methods first when you do notice a pest appearing. So you can plant resistant varieties, and that will hedge your bets that a disease or an insect may not come. You can exclude pests with floating row covers or other barriers. You can hand pick insects and weeds. You can clean up the garden at the end of the season. In a perennial garden, you might want to leave some things there to harbor beneficial insects. But in a vegetable garden, you really want to clean it up so that their insects and disease that might have been on the plants are taken away. And again, you want to encourage beneficial insects that pollinate the plants and prey on pest insects that you may have. Keep in mind that a natural product does not equal non-toxic. Plants can create some pretty nasty chemicals that they use to protect themselves. So some plant-based pesticides could be relatively toxic or more toxic than some of the synthetic ones. But in any case, a pesticide is a legal document. If you feel that you've gotten to the point where that's the only option you have, you want to follow the label directions very carefully and always read and follow it to the letter. You can look for the least toxic materials available Many garden centers have an organic section, and consider pollinator health for that as well. The pollinators sometimes are affected by fungicides in the case of bees. So those are things to look at as well. And I just see a thing about crop rotation and container gardening in the chat. We were going to do questions later, but you can always dump the soil out and replace it with new and clean out the container if you need to. But as Hillary said, you can keep the soil usually for a couple of years and plant something different in it. So that's a good point. You want to monitor plants and evaluate the treatments so that you know what worked and what you might be able to do better. Next, please. Just a quick word about animals. You will probably need to exclude them, particularly deer. You need a fence that they can't reach that encircles the whole area. Small animals, I put some chicken wire over this raised bed just to keep squirrels from burying their nuts there. And birds sometimes will get at the crops too. A lot of animals will go for the tomatoes when it's dry in the summer and they're looking for moisture. So the picture on the bottom will keep just about everything out. Next, please. I want to mention also that pest management in your state may be very, very different from pest management in New York. So do contact your cooperative extension about that and your cooperative extension regarding variety choices. So I'm coming toward the end of my talk. The varieties are endless possibilities, as Hillary said. There's so many things you can do in containers. You can mix and match. You can grow them individually if you'd like. You find your own style, fit your place and plan. I think a lot of the fun of it is to try to figure out what works and what looks good and what's eye-pleasing to your own style. You can change it up as you like. You're not wedded to something that's in the ground that is meant to be there for decades. And children love to use containers too. A lot of times it's at their height, and they can really see everything up close, and they like that. So next, please. That is concludes my presentation, and I would like to thank you. It's been wonderful. And to find your local cooperative extension also, there was a link there that will be provided. And I would like to welcome Hillary back to do the question and answer portion of this presentation.
Of course. Thank you, Amy. That was always so great. Okay, so I've been looking through the chat and the Q&A to try to find a few questions that we can answer. There's a lot of questions about keeping raccoons, squirrels, chipmunks away. And I think as Amy showed in that one of those last slides, the best method is really exclusion. So it might be putting like a hardware cloth or something like that to cover the pots, around the pots. Amy showed that you can, if it's a raised bed in a garden type setting, in like a community garden, you can put the cloth on top. And I say cloth, but it's metal. So you can use like a chicken wire, things of that nature, to get everything so that they can't get to it. Amy, did you have anything to add?
I think you've been pretty thorough about that. There are some, other ways you can try to outwit critters, but they have all day to figure out how to get in. Yeah. So something that's really solid is going to be helpful. We didn't talk about woodchucks or groundhogs. They can dig, as can chipmunks. So if you're building a fence, you may want to run some hardware cloth down to the base of the fence and maybe under the ground an inch or so, and then out a foot to keep them from getting in. And I know people in the West have gophers and other ground squirrels, and I know that they can sometimes breach that as well. But that is something that you can try that may work at least for a while. Some people will have to resort to caging the whole plant, and that just makes it more difficult to access.
Yeah, and so there were actually, I got a few comments saying that there were some people from Canada here, zone 4 and 5. I do apologize for not including that. Really awesome that we have people here from Canada. There's a lot of questions about what to do with bulbs and containers. And there's a few things that you can do to overwinter. You can put the entire container, if you have a place that's going to be cool and dry, you can cut back and put them in like a basement or garage or something like that. Theoretically, you could keep them outside, but then you'd have those critters that we were just talking about looking for food in the middle of the winter, and they might decide that that's a good place to start. So there's also a few questions about potting soil. Is it good to use year after year? If you're talking about a potting mix that you might have had in a bag that you didn't finish the first year, make sure that you're just storing it properly. Make sure that it's closed, that it's airtight. You know, if you want to like put a piece of tape over it or something like that, store it somewhere that it's gonna stay as dry as possible. It can be used as long as you open it up and it looks good. And if you're talking about inside a pot specifically, like Amy has said recently, you definitely want to, you can keep the soil in, but you want to add to it because you want to build up that organic matter and you want to prevent compaction. So you have that wonderful pore space in the soil to help the roots move through it. And then there was also a few people asking if there's any fertilizers in potting soil. I do believe there might be a few companies that do that. It's not necessary because when you fertilize, you know, you're going to have it's in a container, so you're going to have to do it often since it will be leached out so much. Amy, did you have anything?
Yes, I know that there are mixes, commercial mixes that do have fertilizer already in them. And sometimes you can't find a plain one in a garden center. So if that is the case, you could certainly use it. It'll be used up sooner than it would if you were going to put that same soil in the ground for if you were going to do that for any reason. But then you will still have to just fertilize again as the nutrients leach out. And you can use the growth of the plants as a guide. If the plant is growing really, really well and it's doing what it's supposed to do, it probably doesn't need much other than just maintenance, water, and enough sun and being picked regularly if it's a plant that needs that. If you start to see it slow down and it shouldn't be, or it's getting a little yellow and it's not too wet in the container, then maybe it could use some fertilizer. And if you keep a calendar of when you applied the fertilizer, then you can tell like, oh, it's looking a little in and it's already been 3 weeks since I did anything. So yes, I should give it some fertilizer. So that's, you know, that's a good way to keep track of it.
And there's a few questions about the soil temperature, as Amy was saying, for the cool season and the warm season crops at 2 inches. So you can take the thermometer and put it into the soil at about 2 inches. And that's the temperature that you're going to want to look at in order to see where you are in the season. You know, in the Northeast, we're in the 60s. I bet the further south you go, you know, I know people in South Carolina right now who have fruit and vegetables on their crops, you know, so it's definitely dependent on the location, but the soil temperature and what the plant needs will always remain the same no matter where you are in the country. So you're going to want to look at 2 inches down to see what your soil temperature is before planting. And there are a few questions about so a few questions about some, you know, what's the best container size for things like tomatoes and bell pepper plants, things of that nature, and what's the best way to stake them?
Okay. There is a cooperative extension publication in Suffolk County that lists some small containers that you can fit some vegetable plants in. I would suggest you use something larger. They're saying like a 7-gallon container for a tomato, unless it's a small variety. You want to try to find something larger if possible. I would planted my tomatoes 1 to a pot in a 15-gallon container. They were full-size tomato plants though. So you could get a dwarf or a smaller variety in a smaller container for sure. But the roots really filled up that pot very quickly. So if the plant is growing well, it's going to send out a lot of roots and it would appreciate as much room as you can give it. You don't want to make it so large that the soil stays really saturated for very long after heavy rain, because that can cause rot. But you could even maybe cover the top of the soil if you had to, if it got really, really wet for a week or so, something like that. But the large containers tend to do better if you have the room for them. If you have a small balcony and you don't have the room for them, then just plan to be out there a lot more, watering them when it gets hot.
This one's a fun one. What is your favorite fruit to grow?
Wow.
I know that I like to grow strawberries. They tend to be fussy and temperamental at some points, but I know myself and my daughter both really love strawberries. What about you, Amy?
Oh, we grew raspberries. I love raspberries and blackberries. We've grown them. They're not all that hard to grow. I also love the challenge of growing a fig in our area. I've since moved to another house that's a little warmer close by, and my neighbors have figs in the ground, and they already have fruit on them this season, which I think is absolutely amazing. But I like to experiment and grow with different things. And figs you can get a couple of dozen fruit probably in a cold climate if you give it a lot of TLC.
Great. So we have another question about herbs and can they be grown in containers and which are pretty easy to grow? Absolutely. You can not only grow herbs in a container outside, but you can grow them inside on your window in your kitchen or something along those lines. I know I have always have chives growing and scallions. Scallions, you can even take the scallions you get from the grocery store, and as you get to finish eating them, and you get down to the little white part, you can put it right in some water. And they'll go through that. And they're definitely an easy one to grow. Basil is also pretty easy to grow. I think that most herbs are really great in a container. And like I said, both inside and outside.
I would definitely agree. I've grown all kinds of herbs, thyme, rosemary, scented geraniums, that anise hyssop. I think behind me there, the purple thing is perilla. There's some basil back there. They all do really well in containers. Right now, I'm also growing a number of chives. I'm growing Egyptian walking onions in a container, and they do really well. So there's a lot of different things you can do, and it's fun to experiment to see how well things can do in a container.
Yeah. So there's a question about how to drill the planters if you need the drainage holes. You can use just like a regular drill bit if it's plastic or metal or things of that nature. If it's something a little bit more finicky, you might need a mason bit if it's something like a ceramic or things of that nature. And you know what, if it cracks on the bottom, it cracks. It's just more drainage. Let's see what else we have. So we have some questions about some about different types of fertilizer, how often to add them in, the difference, like fertilizer spikes, kelp, things along that nature. And how often do you apply fertilizer? So like we said, you are watering, and even if it's a vegetable crop, you might be watering daily. Like Amy said, you might be watering 2 to 3 times a day. So you're going to really go through that fertilizer because it's going to leach through the soil and it's going to leach out of the soil. So you can look at whatever fertilizer that you're looking to pick up from like a box store or a local garden center, and just read the instructions. They do make one specifically for containers. And the instructions will tell you how often you'll need to do it. It's a lot of question about squirrels and chipmunks. They are the bane of a gardener's existence.
Think
Okay.
back. Oh, I'm going to
No,
say,
go
think
ahead.
back to that enclosure that I showed, and that is probably how you would keep out squirrels and chipmunks.
Yeah. Oh, this is a great one. It's a very good question from an anonymous attendee. Can fertilizer sprayed on plants or flowers burn the plant? Yes. If it's an improper concentration, or if it's something that's supposed to go into the soil and you're putting it onto the plant, it can absolutely burn the plant, depending on how much of it you get on there. And if it's not significant enough, it can outgrow it. So that is definitely a possibility, but you will indeed burn a plant if you get enough fertilizer onto the leaves.
I would like to also add that just because a little bit of fertilizer is good, that a lot is not necessarily better. Fertilizers are salt, and they can burn the roots of the plants as well if they're in a high enough concentration.
And the same thing goes actually with watering. When you water your container garden, or any garden for that matter, you're going to want to water the soil. You don't want to water the foliage of the plants, because if you do, you could have more fungus and more diseases, especially if they don't have time to dry before the sun goes down. So you're definitely going to want to water it earlier in the day, give it time to dry with the sunlight, and also try your hardest not to get the foliage. Ooh, this is a good one too. Some of the indoor containers that this person brings outside for the summer tend to get burnt up. And is there any solutions? Do you have to start in the shade for a few weeks? Yes. So you definitely want to have the plant get acclimated to where it's going outside. Definitely start in the shade, and don't bring it out all day to begin with. Cut like a few hours at a time and increase the amount of hours each day that the plant goes outside. And basically you're building it up over a few weeks. And definitely if the temperatures are like they are in the northeast here, you don't want to leave them overnight. Depending on the plant that it is, there's definitely some temperatures that they want to be at or above at night, and it can do a lot of damage if you leave them outside overnight. And the same thing goes when you're bringing them back inside.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I talked about transplanting and planting from seed. Seed starting would be a whole nother topic. But if you are starting your own transplants, you definitely want to harden them off gradually. As Hillary said, maybe put them out for an hour the first time in a very shady place, and gradually over a week, leave them out longer and longer until they can remain overnight if it is warm enough. And again, I guess I alluded to that when I said if you buy the plants early, you'll need to bring them in. What I do is I bring in my plants at night and I put them back out during the day, because they've been partially hardened off by the nursery. But if you are growing them yourself, you'll want to make sure that you can gradually harden them off. And if you have a house plant, something like a lemon tree, which is a challenge to grow indoors. But if you have a tropical plant that you want to bring back in, you want to bring it in before it even thinks about getting cold, so that it doesn't have so much of a transition. and to put it in a place that has it's shadier for a while before it goes inside, because the lighting inside is not going to be as bright as sunlight outdoors.
So there's some questions. Can I use decorative pots with no holes in the bottom? So the answer to that is yes, but you're going to want to use them for something that can handle the excess water. So something that is, it can have standing water in the pot. And Amy, I know you have some great varieties that they can use.
Well, I'm thinking watercress.
Right?
I have seen also water chestnuts grown in a container. One thing to also think about if you don't have any drainage is that's a place mosquitoes are going to be very, very happy. So you'll want to make sure that you can treat the mosquitoes. There are natural products you can use that only affect mosquitoes. But that could definitely be an issue if there's standing water in a pot.
Great. So this one says, what container material is best for use? That can be left and filled with soil through New York or anywhere else other than plastic. So right, we had said that plastic can be left out. It's, you know, it's plastic. So it can be left out over the winter. There's no problem with freezing, thawing. It'll eventually get brittle, but it'll take a while. You can also use like a stone, which would be really good outside year round. You can always have stone. You can do fiberglass, which tend to be a little bit more pricey, but you can definitely leave them outside. You definitely want to stay away from terracotta. You're going to want to bring terracotta inside because they will crack with the freeze and thaw. Amy, do you have anything else?
Wood, maybe. Wood
duh.
might warp. Wood might warp, but you can leave it out, and still probably better to drag it into a protected spot if you can. But you could use wood for a few seasons.
And that's great. All of these are great for New York and also across the country, because while we might have you know, snow in the winter, you know, there's also excess heat in some areas like Florida or California or something like that. So these are also great if you have high heat, not even just, you know, cold freezing. Okay, let's keep looking. I'm juggling through the chat and through the Q&A to see if there's anything new. Let's keep going. Ooh, this is a good one. Amy, can you just talk about thinning out plants one more time and how to choose?
Yes. If you buy a seed packet, it will come with instructions of how to space the plants. So you want to, in a big garden, you have a lot of room to do that. In a container, sometimes it's easier just to start with the right number of plants in the pot. But if you're growing lettuce from seed or radishes or something that's happy just being planted directly into the soil, then you'll put more seed than you need in there to hedge your bets that you'll have something, and you'll need to thin out or remove the plants that are spaced too closely. Lettuce is a great thing to do this with because as it grows, you can remove more and more plants and use the thinnings in salad, and they're quite good. You can also eat the little radish seedlings. They're nice and spicy in a salad. So those are all plants that you can use, and you can do the same with herbs and other plants. Most of the vegetables that you want to thin, if they are fruiting crops, maybe they're not going to be edible. But there are a lot of greens and root crops that you can eat at the baby size, and pay a lot of money for that if you go out somewhere to buy it.
So a few questions, we're going to just rapid fire. Is it best to water in the morning or evening? Definitely in the morning. Like I said, you want to be able to have that plant dry off. If the plant is if it is night and the plant is still wet, you're going to have more of a chance to have diseases and fungus and everything take over, really. You know, you'll find that you might have some problems with your plants then. Someone asked if I can elaborate on the scallions in water. So yeah, so as soon as it gets to like no more green, you know, and you have just the white part on the bottom with the roots, because they still have the roots on them, you can throw it in some water. I found that if you keep it in the water, it tends to get gnats and things of that nature. So I usually get 3 or maybe 4 cuttings of like fully grown scallions, and that's when I transition it into the garden or a pot. That's just me though. You know, you can put it right into the garden after. You can leave it in the water and see how long it lasts for you. That's the beauty of gardening. We'll all have different answers for the same questions a little bit. And then this one actually came up a lot, Amy. What is our favorite vegetable to grow? What's yours?
I like almost all vegetables. I love tomatoes. My grandmother gave me some of her tomatoes to grow, and so I love those. I like okra. I like all kinds of vegetables. So for me, it's really hard to pick a single one.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely the best vegetable to grow for you is the one that you and your family enjoy. So I am a fan of growing spinach and zucchini and anything that has a really, you know, zucchini, you have both the flowers and the zucchini. So you have 2 ways of using the one crop. Let's see. And there's actually a question about deadheading. Does it always have to be done? No. If you have something that you like the seed head or you like the way it looks, you can absolutely leave it. And just like you might need to cut it off if it starts to like mildew or something of that nature. If you're looking for how to deadhead a specific flower, you can absolutely reach out to your extension, your local extension. Everyone is really knowledgeable about how to deadhead whatever flower you might be thinking of putting into your containers. Amy, did you have anything to add?
One thing to think about is if you're growing, say, beans, which may not be the most productive thing in a container, but sometimes it's fun to try. I have grown pole beans in a container and gotten a few things. If you don't pick those regularly, you will end up having less and less and less because once the seed starts to swell, the plant then thinks that it's done its job and it shuts down, it can shut down. So there are a few other plants like that. Tomatoes will keep growing until the frost and producing, as will a number of their relatives. But there are other plants that will just stop if they've had, if they can mature their seed.
And if you have tomatoes, another question that came up, if you have tomatoes that you're about to put in your garden and they are flowering, should the flowers be taken off?
I would definitely do that at the beginning. And again, that's probably been held a long time. So we do have information which probably would be different from state to state of when to start various vegetables, like how many weeks before frost. So that is also usually listed on your seed packet. And if you really want to start a tomato, maybe 6 or 8 weeks before it gets warm enough to plant, so that you don't have a 12-week-old seedling that's pot bound and flowering. So those are all things to think about when you're planning out what you might start from seed.
Great. All right. And at this time, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for all the wonderful questions and for taking the time out tonight to listen to us present. I am going to turn it back over to Jim Irish, where he is going to present you guys with some closing remarks.
Well, thank you. Now, that's all the time we have tonight. Thank you again for joining us. We hope everything you learned tonight will help you start or improve your container garden at home or in your neighborhood if you volunteer at a community garden. I, for one, learned tonight that Canada and Oregon are part of the Northeast Corridor, so that should be very helpful. We want to thank Barbara Sachs for her partnership on this event and the work she does for our community. And we thank our speakers, Amy Albam and Hillary Jufer, for accepting our invitation and for sharing their expertise with us in their wonderful presentations. Before we close, I would like to encourage everyone to support Cornell and specifically to consider supporting Cornell Cooperative Extension and the extraordinary work that they do when making your gift to Cornell. Finally, we want to thank the staff in Cornell's Office of Alumni Affairs and Development for the Northeast Corridor for all their support and for making this event possible. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.